It didn't start with shouting. It didn't start with a scandal or a camera catching someone off guard. It started with a boy and a microphone, and a man who had spent his life earning the right to speak. The event was held at the Franklin Theater in Nashville, a place steeped in Southern charm and history, now transformed into a sleek, modern civic stage. The town hall was part of a national tour titled Future Voices, Real America. Its goal? To bridge the gap between emerging Gen Z conservatives and progressive lawmakers in a civil exchange. The lights dimmed slightly as the moderator welcomed two very different men to the stage. One, Barron Trump, tall, calm, freshly polished from a series of youth conservative conferences. The other, Zohran Mamdani, lean, sharp-eyed, a son of immigrants, a New York Assemblyman who walked into politics through protest, not privilege. People expected sparks, but no one expected what came next. As the questions started, the usual pattern played out. Digital privacy, climate urgency, education reform. Mamdani answered with calm resolve, referencing public housing battles and grassroots activism. Barron countered with practiced phrases about freedom and tradition. But then, Barron leaned forward, cleared his throat, and said, "Assemblyman Mamdani, with all due respect, I've seen your speeches, your interviews. You talk loud, you talk a lot, but it feels like you're more interested in stirring outrage than offering actual solutions." The room went still. No booing, no clapping, just breathless stillness. Mamdani didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at the young man across from him like someone who had spent years learning when not to speak. And then, he did. "Barron, what you call outrage, I call survival." That's all it took. The audience didn't erupt. They leaned in because suddenly it wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning. Mamdani's voice didn't rise, but it carried. "I was organizing tenant strikes when you were still in middle school. I've knocked on doors in neighborhoods where people fear eviction more than they fear violence. Do you know what that kind of silence feels like? When people are told they're too loud for asking not to be forgotten?" Barron smiled, that quiet, trained smirk, but it didn't quite land. "I'm just saying your approach seems more combative than collaborative." Mamdani paused, and then he said the line that cracked the room open. "You say that because you've never had to fight for your seat. I say that because I've never been given one. What do you think? Have you ever had to raise your voice just to be seen? Let us know in the comments." For a split second, Barron tried to respond, but Mamdani was already in motion. "When my family immigrated, we didn't get invitations. We got inspections. My mother was a playwright. My father a voice against colonialism. I didn't grow up with golf clubs. I grew up with eviction notices under our door." The crowd didn't applaud. They absorbed it. "You talk about tone," Mamdani said, his eyes steady, "but tone never taught me how to get through nights when my community feared ICE raids. Tone never helped me when I sat with tenants facing illegal lockouts. Tone is a privilege you get when your pain isn't ignored." Barron shifted in his chair. It was the first time he looked young. And Zohran, he didn't press, he didn't pounce, he just let the silence breathe. "If you're still here, if this made you feel something, don't scroll away. Like this video. Subscribe. We tell stories that stay with you." Barron Trump didn't move at first. He sat perfectly still, blinking once, then twice, like someone realizing the script he had rehearsed no longer matched the moment he was living. The silence between them was no longer just silence. It had weight now. Not tension, not drama, something heavier. And Zohran Mamdani knew exactly what to do with it. "You talk like people who've never been afraid of the mail," he said calmly. "People like my constituents get eviction notices, medical bills, court summons, in envelopes they never had a chance to answer." He wasn't raising his voice. He didn't need to. "You're not wrong to want calm," Zohran added, turning gently toward the audience. "But calm isn't always an option. Calm doesn't pay the rent. Calm doesn't stop a landlord from changing the locks." The room was utterly still now. Even the moderator had leaned back. Barron cleared his throat again, more reflex than intention. "I didn't mean to offend. I just think if we all communicated more respectfully, we might get further. That's when Mamdani leaned in. Not closer, not louder, just more present. Barron, what you're missing is this. Some of us had to shout just to be allowed in the room. He let the words land, then continued. You believe respect is about tone. I believe respect is about truth. And truth isn't always polite. The camera panned across the crowd. Teachers, students, elders, organizers, parents. Some nodded slowly. Some just watched, locked in. One older woman in the second row quietly whispered, "That's it." And then Mamdani told a story. When I was 22, I helped a tenant fight a retaliatory eviction. The landlord said the woman was aggressive. Her crime? She asked for heat in the middle of February in an apartment with 2 children and cracked windows. I sat with her in court. I watched as the opposing lawyer smirked, as if demanding dignity was impolite. That day she didn't win, but we didn't stop. We organized. We pushed, and she stayed. He turned back to Barron. So no, I don't shrink to make powerful people comfortable. You watching this, have you ever felt like you were told to be less just to be accepted? Write about it in the comments. We want to hear. Barron's jaw flexed. His eyes dropped slightly. He wasn't outmatched by intellect. He was overwhelmed by experience. He tried again. I respect your work, really, but don't you think sometimes being so direct just turns people off? And there it was, the moment Mamdani had been waiting for. I'm not in this to be liked. I'm in this because people I represent can't afford to be ignored. The sentence didn't just hit, it echoed. Even the moderator seemed unsure whether to intervene or let it breathe. He chose silence. Zohran looked out into the audience. We ask young people to be passionate, but only if that passion makes us comfortable. We want them to care, but not too loudly. We tell them to get involved, then roll our eyes when they show up with more fire than polish. He let out a slow breath. But I'll take the fire every time. Somewhere near the front, a man, maybe late 60s, a Vietnam vet by the look of his hat, nodded and muttered, "That boy's learning." And he was, because for the first time, Barron Trump stopped trying to win. He stopped performing. He was listening. Zohran noticed, and he didn't gloat. He just softened. Barely. You don't need to apologize, he said. But you do need to understand that real leadership isn't about sounding right. It's about being willing to be wrong and staying in the room anyway. Barron didn't respond. He just nodded. The moderator glanced at the time, shuffled his notes, and prepared to pivot. But no one was ready to move on. Not yet. Something had shifted in the Franklin Theater. You could feel it in the posture of the crowd, in the way people sat a little more still, a little more awake. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about something harder to name. It was about presence. Zohran Mamdani looked at Barron Trump, not with pity, not with pride, but with the quiet recognition of someone who knows what it costs to speak truth to comfort. You came here with a strategy, Zohran said gently, and I came here with memory. The line didn't spark applause. It stirred something deeper. You brought confidence. I brought consequence. That pause, it wasn't theatrical. It was surgical. And then Mamdani shared another story, not to grandstand, but to ground the conversation in something real. I once met a teenage girl in Queens, he said. Her landlord had black mold in the bathroom, broken heaters, unsafe stairs. Her mom cleaned hotel rooms 6 nights a week. When they reported the violations, the landlord filed eviction papers the next day. She told me she felt invisible, that her voice didn't matter, that adults only listened when they smiled and said, "Thank you for what little they had." He turned slightly to face the audience. This country has built entire systems around who gets to speak and who's expected to stay quiet. And when people like me raise our voice, we're called angry. We're told to calm down. But silence has never protected us. At that, Barron finally looked up, not defensively, not with resistance, but with something closer to understanding. I guess I never thought about it that way, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've always just spoken. Zohran nodded, slowly. And that's the difference. That moment, quiet, unscripted, real, hit harder than any punchline. Because this wasn't about shaming a young man for what he didn't know. It was about showing him what he hadn't seen. Dear listener, have you ever walked into a room thinking you were ready, only to realize you didn't even know what the room was built for? Share that moment with us in the comments. Someone might need to read it. And then, just when it felt like the energy might finally settle, Mamdani said something no one expected. You don't need to carry guilt, he said, looking directly at Barron, but you do need to carry responsibility. Another pause, and then, because when you walk into a room like this, when you speak into a mic, you're shaping more than your own image. You're shaping how people like that girl in Queens are seen or ignored. Barron inhaled deeply. You could almost see the layers peeling. You think I should stop speaking? He asked. Zohran shook his head. No, he replied. I think you should start speaking from something real. And that's what made the difference. This wasn't a takedown. It wasn't a victory lap. It was something you don't see often anymore. Correction without cruelty, strength without spectacle. And as the lights above the stage warmed and the air settled over the crowd, Zohran turned back toward the audience, his voice steady, unshaken. This isn't about making anyone small, he said. It's about asking, what are you using your voice for? There was something in the way that Zohran said that last line, not sharp, not smug, just grounded, like a truth that didn't need volume to be heard. The room had grown quieter somehow, even quieter than before. Phones that once hovered for clips now hung limp in people's hands. They weren't just watching anymore. They were witnessing. Barron Trump leaned back in his chair. His shoulders, which had been squared and camera-ready at the start, had softened. Not slouched, just humbled. So what should I say then, he asked. What would make it real? It wasn't defensive, it was honest. And Zohran paused. He looked at him, not as an opponent, not as a target, but as a young man who had just asked the right question for the first time that night. Start with what scares you, Zohran said, not with what scores you likes. You could feel that one settle deep. Start with the moment you realized the world didn't revolve around you. Start with when you failed. Start with what you don't understand. And then, his voice dropped slightly. Because real leadership doesn't start with certainty, it starts with doubt. A low murmur stirred in the back rows. Not disagreement, recognition. When I was younger, Zohran continued, I watched my parents get ignored in meetings because of their accents. I watched working-class people get dismissed for not saying the right words in the right way. But I also watched how much louder silence can be when it's built from pain. He turned toward the audience again. We think leadership is about speaking first, about having the sharpest line. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay long enough to hear something that makes you uncomfortable. Barron didn't speak. He just looked down for a second, then up. There was no smirk this time, no adjustment of the blazer, just stillness. I thought I was coming in prepared, he said quietly. I thought I had something important to say. Zohran didn't interrupt. But maybe I was just performing. Maybe I wasn't ready. That line didn't make the crowd gasp. It made them exhale. Because everyone in that room at some point in their lives had felt that the moment you realize your words aren't enough unless they come from somewhere real. Zohran nodded. Readiness isn't about having the mic, he said. It's about having the weight to carry what comes through it. And then, almost as if time itself paused, he delivered the line that would be quoted, clipped, and posted across every screen within hours. The mic doesn't make you right. Listening might. Silence. And then a single from someone in the crowd. Not applause, just acknowledgement. Have you ever said something you thought was powerful, only to realize later it wasn't enough? Share that with us in the comments. Someone else might be carrying the same feeling. Barron leaned forward this time, but not to defend himself. I want to learn, he said simply. Zohran didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just nodded again, quietly. Then you're already closer than most. The moderator cleared his throat softly, still unsure how or if to move the program forward. But everyone knew in that moment something had changed. And it wasn't just Barron, it was all of us. By now, the Franklin Theater felt less like a stage and more like a classroom. One where the teacher wasn't standing, but sitting, speaking softly, letting truth do the heavy lifting. The moderator tried to transition to the next topic, digital privacy, but even his voice sounded hollow after what had just unfolded. The crowd's focus was still glued to Zohran and Barron, as if the rest of the program no longer mattered. Zohran sensed it too. He didn't force the moment, but he didn't let it slip away either. Barron, he said, steady and calm, you have something rare. People listen before you speak. That's not a gift. It's a responsibility. Barron nodded slightly, his face showing the weight of those words. I know I have advantages, Barron admitted. I grew up where doors opened without me knocking. But I never realized how heavy that can feel when you're talking to someone who's had to kick those same doors down. The crowd was still, every pair of eyes locked on the two of them. Privilege doesn't make you wrong, Zohran said, his tone soft but firm. But ignoring it does. And then, like he had all night, Zohran reached for something deeper, something human. I've buried friends because of systems that don't bend. I've sat with mothers who didn't know if their kids would come home from school. I've walked into neighborhoods where police tape wasn't rare. It was routine. He let that sink in. You don't need to pretend to know that pain, Zohran continued, but you do need to respect it. Have you ever been in a room where someone's words stopped you cold, made you rethink what you thought you knew? Drop your thoughts below. I want to see if this hits you like it's hitting me right now. Barron's lips parted like he wanted to respond, but no words came out. For once, the young man with the famous last name wasn't speaking to win. He was just absorbing, Zohran noticed. You asked me earlier if being loud is the same as being right, Zohran said. It's not, but sometimes being silent is the fastest way to disappear. I don't speak to hear my voice. I speak because I've seen what happens when no one does. Barron exhaled slowly like he'd been holding his breath since the beginning of the event. I thought this was going to be a debate, he admitted quietly. But maybe it's a lesson. Zohran gave the smallest nod. A lesson for both of us, he said. Because I have to remind myself too, sometimes the loudest thing we can do is listen. The line landed like a whisper that echoed, and for the first time, the crowd didn't just watch, they felt. By the time the moderator attempted to move to the next question, even the camera crew hesitated. They knew they'd captured something rare, something raw, something that couldn't be scripted. The next morning, there were no cameras, no press, just Barron Trump quietly showing up at a senior housing complex in East Nashville. Zohran Mamdani met him at the door with a clipboard. No grand welcome. Inside, the air felt heavy with stories people rarely get to tell. One woman, her voice cracked with age, said, "You all think we complain, but really we're begging not to be forgotten." Barron didn't speak, he just listened. No defense, no politics, just presence. When he finally asked, "What can I do?" she simply replied, "Come back, not with cameras, just with ears." In the hallway, Barron pulled Zohran aside and whispered, "They don't teach this part." Zohran nodded. That's because this part isn't about speaking. It's about seeing. That day, Barron didn't post, no tweet, just a quiet message to Zohran's office. "Thank you for taking me. I'll be back." Because real growth doesn't need a spotlight. It needs silence. Weeks passed. The headlines faded, but something quieter remained: text chains, forwarded clips, whispers between classrooms and community centers. Barron kept showing up. No cameras, no applause, just questions that came from a deeper place. At a meeting in Eastwood, an old man leaned toward him and said, "You listen like it mattered. That's rare." Barron nodded quietly. Meanwhile, Zohran received a message from a teenager in Memphis. "They call me loud at school, but after you spoke, I realized maybe I'm just passionate." He printed it and kept it in his wallet. Months later, at a forum in Richmond, a moderator asked, "What's been your proudest moment in office?" Zohran didn't hesitate. "The night I didn't win a debate, but helped someone take off their armor." No name, just truth. Because real leadership isn't about winning. It's about changing how someone carries themselves when the cameras turn off. And if this story moved you, subscribe. Because here we don't chase noise. We chase meaning.